Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. I'm Kristen Dare Horsley with TPAC Education. And who's this? It's not Gail. Gail and David are actually leaving on a jet plane, and so we have the wonderful Midori Lockett from Vanderbilt. Midori, what do you do at Vanderbilt?
I am actually what's known as a community liaison, so I actually work with Vanderbilt's partners in the community, like the wonderful TPAC.
So what would you like to tell us? What did Gail have you say to us today as the liaison?
Mostly what she told me to say was, let's go out and support the opera. This is a wonderful, wonderful show that they're doing, and I'm so grateful that you're all here to join us this afternoon to learn a little bit more about Glory Denied.
Thank you. And so thank you all for coming. It's always a great day when John Hoomes and the Nashville Opera are in the house. So without further ado, I'm going to ask them to come on out. And thank you again for coming. You know, I'm from Illinois, and so I have to say this. Growing up there with the cloud, the dark cloud of the Cubs, like my whole life, and then they win the World Series last night. So we know that anything is possible. We know that for sure now. So, but like I said, it's always a great day when John Hoomes is in the house, and I'm going to let him introduce the panel, and I want you guys to enjoy yourselves. This performance will actually be performed at the Noah Liff Opera Center, and so we're so honored that they were able to come to TPAC to tell us about it. But please know, when you go buy your tickets, you're going to actually go see it in their wonderful space at the Noah Liff Opera Center. But I will let John tell you all of that. So from Midori and I, thank you so much for being here, and enjoy. And we will see you again in January when we will have the Melodors. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. Good morning. Thank you for being here today. My name is John Hoomes. I'm the CEO and Artistic Director of the Nashville Opera. I'm also the stage director for the production Glory Denied that we're going to talk about. We have some singers to hear a little music. First, though, I would like to ask the rest of my panel to tell you a little something about themselves and a little about their expertise.
I'm Bob Driscoll, and I'm a professor of economics at Vanderbilt. I don't think I was invited here because I'm an economist. I spent 1969 in Vietnam, and Tom Schwartz, a professor of history who teaches Vietnam, has interacted with me at Vanderbilt and put my name forward as somebody who might add a little perspective to display this opera.
I'm Dean Williamson, the music director of Nashville Opera, and I'll be conducting the opera that we're doing.
Okay. This is an opera written by a man named Tom Ciapullo. He'll be here in Nashville with us for the shows. We open on the 11th, which honestly, coincidentally, was Veterans Day, but it felt right once we realized that. This is a really fantastic piece about an American hero whose name is Colonel James Thompson. Colonel Thompson has the, I won't say it's the honor, but he has the position of being the longest held prisoner of war in American history. He was held prisoner in Vietnam. He was captured in 1964. He was released finally in 1973, 10 days short of 9 years in prison. 5 of those years, he never saw another American. After 5 years, he was moved to Hanoi into more of a real prison system. This opera is about this man's life, about his service to our country, the trials he went through, but also about him coming home and what he faced when that happened. This is obviously a very serious piece. This does have a few light moments, but the majority of it deals with what Jim Thompson experienced. So we do have a little music from the piece I'd like to let you hear. A lot of people, when they hear the term, it's a modern opera, they look a little like I just said you're going to have a root canal. I understand that. But Tom Ciapullo was very careful to write this piece with very, very eclectic music. And so sometimes I will admit the music is somewhat dissonant when we talk about his imprisonment, as you wouldn't want that music to be pretty. But other times, Tom writes with a great lyricism and incredible melody. So the first number we're going to hear today is a piece entitled After You Hear Me Out. This piece occurs after Colonel Thompson has come home. He has come home to his family. He had a wife and 4 children that were left here. There's a lot more to the story with the family that you'll find out when you come and see the show. But he was in prison for 9 years, and after a couple of years, his wife basically wanted to move on with her life. She was a single woman in the 60s with 4 children, and she tried to have the army, she asked the army to actually have him declared dead so she could move on with her life. There's a famous section that if you were old enough to remember during the Vietnam War, there were bracelets, MIA bracelets and POW bracelets you could get. She forbid the army from issuing a bracelet for him. So when he came home, he came back to a country that he did not recognize and a family that barely recognized him. And one of the first encounters with his wife, she's very honest with him, and she says, look, I was a single woman with 4 children, and I did what I had to do to survive while you were gone. And so Tom wrote this really incredible song called After You Hear Me Out. And all the text, I'll say the majority of the text of the piece is all based on oral history and letters. So these are real words that people spoke. And I'm going to read you a little of this. This is the first lyrics to the song. The wife is talking to her husband. He's just come back from the war. And she sings, after you hear me out, if you don't want me around anymore, I'll leave. I'll take my coat and go. I'll leave. And that will be the end of it. You can decide what's wrong or right, and you'll never have to see this face again after you hear me out. And in the middle of the song, there's a strange section, and she really said this, where she said, but you'll get to see the kids. I wouldn't ever keep you from the kids. I wouldn't do that. That's your right, their right. I wouldn't stop you. I wouldn't do that. And when I first read that, I thought, I didn't realize not seeing the kids was on the table. But apparently it was. So now I want to introduce soprano Rebecca Cheval and accompanist Amy Tate Williams to sing After You Hear Me Out from Glory Denied.
Don't want me around anymore.
So, Dean, I'm going to turn to you first. We talk a little about the music and the musical language of this.
Yeah, Chapullo was an incredible pianist himself, and if you can go online on YouTube and see videos of him really rocking the score. One of the interesting things he does, which is similar to what Wagner does in The Ring, which is use themes or leitmotifs, which are little snippets or melodies that attach to emotion or a character. So you will hear these themes come back when a certain thing is happening in the libretto. And then at the end of each act, he kind of lets them all snowball upon each other, and they kind of all start coming back, just similar to what Wagner did in the immolation scene at the end of The Ring. The other thing that Tom was very insistent on was using what we call bitonal, so using two keys at once. And after doing a lot of thinking about it, to me it represents the two worlds that the Alice and Thompson live in. It's almost like these two keys can't come together. They're two separate people that can't come together. So what he does is put these two different keys at the same time, which creates that tension.
So, Bob, you actually have experienced some in the subject matter.
Yes.
You do. And would you tell us something about that?
Well, I guess to preface it, I got drafted in 1968 and spent most of 1969 in Vietnam. I wasn't gone 9 years. I can't imagine that. But some of the themes, I recognize. Just hearing this song, as soon as you're inducted in the Army, you start, as you march, singing songs about how your girlfriend's been taken away. And they get you thinking about this way almost immediately. Lucky for me, my girlfriend had enough foresight to break up with me before I went in the Army. But throughout this experience, there you are. We were in the jungle in rice paddies, and it's kind of a crude existence. And what kept so many people going was, in fact, they've got a wife or a girlfriend back home, and time after time, they get the Dear John letter, and it was just a regular occurrence. And I think, it's especially crushing because you're in a dangerous and uncomfortable situation. It's keeping you going, and all of a sudden, you hear from your family. One fellow heard from his family the way your wife is taken up with another man, and it's a really unbelievably common theme. And most people, when they either it happened while they were still overseas or when they got home, our old medic. His girlfriend had stayed true to him, and they got married, and it lasted not very long. And you feel like when you're far from home and in danger, and it keeps you going. And the reality is, life's going on, and it's usually not going to end well. So, yes, that's a very familiar theme. That so many people actually really experienced. I came home not after 9 years, but I spent 1969 in Vietnam, and I'm a baby boomer. And what do people talk about 1969? They went to the moon, they went to Woodstock, and I was in the jungle somewhere. So you miss these sort of cultural experiences. You share your own cultural experience with a smaller group. 9 years, I'm flabbergasted to think about how that must have felt, because even for a year, coming home was a shock. People are worried about getting a new washing machine. For me, I came back to Baltimore, Maryland, how the Orioles are doing, and it all seems so mundane, and it's just difficult.
Well, there's a song in this piece that where basically Jim Thorpe to himself, he has a monologue where he talks about things he missed, and 9 years is a long time. And what Tom Trapullo did is he went through and basically listed off things that were either invented or happened or became popular, because I mean he missed the assassination of Robert Kennedy, he missed Woodstock. And and he has one like fast patter song that starts, he says, Teflon cookware, men with long hair, stay pressed shirts, mini skirts, no Sid Caesar, no frost freezer. And so he lists like a litany of things that happened without him. It's a little like Rip Van Winkle, where you come back after 9 years in the country. I mean, think about it, from 1964 to 73, that a lot changed. But it's a terrific piece about this man's life and his family and how he dealt with things. Ultimately, though, it is somewhat of a tragic piece just because of his imprisonment and then him trying to deal with that. I do want to say, too, we are, I think as Kristen said, we're producing this show in the Noah Liff Opera Center, which is on the west side of town. It's in Sylvan Heights. I can only seat around 270 people per night. It's selling really well. If you want to come, I invite you to by either calling TPAC, you can call the opera office, you can go online to tpac.org or nashvilleopera.org and buy a ticket to this, because it's going to be a really special evening. The way we have the room set up, we're actually performing in the three-quarter round, so instead of having an orchestra pit between you, the front row is 6 feet from the stage. So it's a very intimate space. But that's November 11, 12, and 13. We're doing a Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday matinee. So after Thompson came home, the Army asked him to speak on his perseverance and the way he overcame things and how he survived all that time. And so this leads us to our next musical number that we're going to offer. This piece is, Jim Thompson has been invited to speak in the family church. And so we have a church scene where he speaks to the congregation, today that would be all of you, about what he has gone through and just what happened to him. So this is the church scene, the very beginning aria from the church scene from Glory Denied with baritone Michael Mays. Michael?
Professional soldier and his family must forego putting down rules. Still, our taproot is firmly established in this church. Alice and I were born and brought up here. Here we received our Christian education, were confirmed into the church, and were married. Our family worshipped here for many years, and my mother taught French pins from Old North Sunday School. And later I too sang in the choir. And to a time my son at 9 years old will be baptized at Old North Church. Today, by the grace of God, we are all together again. Members of the congregation, pastor, my friends, I've come home.
So the composer Tom Chapullo writes really beautiful music. That's a very touching and moving piece. The opera kind of goes between this type of beauty and this type of intense emotional feeling as it tries to balance what he went through and what it was like for him to go through this imprisonment and then come home. I want to ask Bob. Bob, you were there 1969?
Yes.
And then tell us about when you came back. Any readjustment or what had changed? I can't imagine.
Well, part of it was just the when we were over there, we talked about coming home as going back to the world, and it was such a different environment, and you kept thinking about what you left behind and what it was going to be like. People saved their money. You didn't have any. If you were in the field like my friends and I were, you didn't have anywhere to spend any money, so you saved money. People had visions of coming home and buying a Buick Deuce and a Quarter, a Buick Electra 225, and an exceptional sound system, but you had these things to keep you going. And I think for most of us, we came home and it was just a shock. The mundaneness of what people are interested in, the fact that really people are living their lives, and eventually we would get back to it. Most of us left an ex-wife or two along the way after returning home, and there was an adjustment period, getting back to this is not most of your life is not life and death situations, and high drama and also incredible boredom, and it was just kind of a shock. The rest of the world had kept on going, and you had these expectations when you got back that had kept you going. Some of it was women, and some of it was things, and it was impossible for the reality to live up to that. But coming home was still an amazing thing. I remember coming back December 22nd, and there you are, back in the world. You don't think about it that much, but it was, you made it.
there was a thing, I did a lot of research on Thompson and our men that were in the military and in Vietnam. When he spent a number of years, as I mentioned, in a kind of a makeshift jungle prison where he was by himself. Or as it says in the piece, he was kept in what they call a tiger cage, which is a cage 5 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet. And you were still required to bow whenever the commander came near the cage. So he went through a lot. When he was finally transferred to Hanoi, one thing he said is that once he saw other Americans and they were able to talk and have small talk, they didn't really talk about girls. They didn't talk about football or baseball. They talked about food and wanting to get home to have a hamburger and things like that. Dean has a little connection to this through his family as well. Would you mind talking about that some?
Sure.
Your childhood?
I grew up over there in the Far East. My dad was a pilot with Air America, which was the CIA covert airline, and his job was basically when the French pulled out of Vietnam. The reason we got involved is because Cambodia and Laos were technically, like Switzerland, supposed to be neutral territories. So if our Air Force pilots got shot down outside of Vietnam in one of those countries, we couldn't technically go in and get them, which is why the CIA got involved. And it's all documented, and there's a professor at the University of Texas in Austin who's made it his entire study, and now the Air America library is there, and the CIA fully supports that. So the kind of thing we grew up in, I see what my mom went through and all of the wives. It's almost like the astronaut wives. You don't know if your husband's going to come home from a mission, and there would be times my dad would be gone for 2 weeks, and we didn't know where he was, and he wouldn't know till he got to the airport. So the stress on the women was incredible, and I'm quarter Chinese. My mom's half Chinese, half English. So I grew up with, basically, we were all mongrels. So a lot of black, Hispanic, white servicemen married to Korean, Japanese, Chinese women. And so it's a very expat kind of life. And the first time I actually lived in the States was in high school. So for me, it was the similar situation, coming to live in 10th grade for the first time in the US. We tried LA and then went to Seattle. And it was like I could have gone to Turkey or Germany. You know, I hated it. I just wanted to go back to the Far East. And so it's a very kind of shadowy, different existence, and that whole military life it's pretty tough. It's pretty tough.
Have you spent time back in the Far East?
Yeah, we last time we took my mom back to Shanghai and Hong Kong in 2009, and I still Google. I can find Google Maps the house we grew up in, Japan and Tokyo. You know, and I was telling, I lived at my 9th grade. We were up in the middle of nowhere. There's a top secret Air Force base in northern Thailand called Udon Thani, which was the direct jumping off point for the B-52s into the war. It was so close, I think, well, I should back up a little bit. In summer of '73, we were in Vientiane, Laos. And I remember just before that fell, the planes overhead would be fighting. Air America, I found out later, was the CIA almost had helicopters with rope ladders ready to pluck us up out of our houses. It was that dangerous. So then we got sent across the Mekong River in a little boat. We went into Thailand, and then to this Air Force base that all the families, the wives and the kids, could not stay there. They had to be in Bangkok. But the CIA says, oh, just bring your whole family. So I went to the CIA high school. 9th grade, there were 8 of us. 5 seniors graduated that year. I played Pomp and Circumstance on an out-of-tune piano in the tropics. It was fun. It's a different existence. And then the older brother of a friend of mine that we grew up with, who's a pilot for American Airlines now, he is going through all kinds of lymphoma, and they're thinking they're connecting it now to Agent Orange because he grew up when they were spraying all of that. So yeah, these are the things that you have to deal with later.
Indeed. Well, I want to tell you a little the structure of the piece. The way this is not a conventional piece as far as it doesn't really move from point A to B to C. The way Tom Ciapullo had written this piece, it's almost a stream of consciousness piece. At least I think it is. With James Thompson having a flashback of his life and we see various incidents, sometimes in and out of time, different times during the piece, like different thoughts that come to him. But the way Tom structured the opera, the book that this is based on was an oral history where Tom Philpott interviewed the family. He interviewed Jim Thompson himself. Thompson passed away in 2002, by the way. But he came home in 73 and he died in 2002. He lived a long time. But the book is all oral history and verbatim text from the family, from the wife, from Jim, and that's what the opera is pretty much based on. One thing I want to tell you I find interesting is that when we first were looking at doing this opera, and I was looking at how it would work, and the Lift Center is a place we do more intimate, fairly intense pieces, and the structure of the piece is there are only 4 characters in the entire piece. In the book, there are interviews with maybe 30, 50 characters. People, I should say. I'm not used to working with a piece where people are real and alive. I'm used to working with La Boheme and Tosca and pieces like that, but this is about real people that exist. And so one thing the composer did when he wrote this, instead of using 40 people in the piece talking, he cut it down to 4 characters. And 2 of the characters are Jim Thompson and his wife Alice, spelled A-L-Y-C-E. And those 2 characters when he comes home in 1973. And then the other 2 characters are Jim Thompson and his wife Alice just as he left for the service almost 10 years earlier. And so we see back in time and a time of more innocence and then pushing forward a time when a lot has happened in that relationship. And sometimes we all appear in the same scene. Sometimes somebody sings someone else's line. It's very interesting. It feels very dreamlike in the way it's done. But I looked at this piece. It's been done. This piece has been done successfully around the country, and so I said, I think this is a good piece for us to do. And I'd been looking at it, and I finally decided, we should do this. Now I hadn't told anybody because we program a couple of years ahead, and then we do an announcement. And so I was in my office, and I got an email from a woman named Joyce. And I got a very nice email, and she wrote and said, we don't know each other, but I wanted to write to make you aware of an opera based on the life of Colonel James Thompson, the longest held POW in American history. And I hope that you will consider doing this because he's my father-in-law. And I went, wow. And so I wrote her back, and I said, it's a coincidence you write because I'm looking at this piece, and I said, and in all likelihood, we're going to program it in fall of 2016. And she wrote me back and said, that's wonderful news. The family would love to be there. By the way, we live in Hendersonville. And I went, really? Wow. So the more I looked into things, it seemed that Thompson and his wife tried to reconcile. After about 1.5 years, it didn't work. He moved on with his life. He moved to Key West, Florida. She remarried, and she and her new husband bought a small farm, I believe somewhere east of Murfreesboro, Tennessee. They were in Massachusetts, New Jersey, and then Massachusetts. And they had 4 children. They had 3 daughters, and he had 1 son named Jim Jr. And little by little, I think the entire family moved to this area because Mom was here. And so now, if I'm not mistaken, the family is here. Alice, the wife, had passed away in 2009. But on the Saturday night, on the 12th, we're going to have all 4 children, his 3 daughters and 1 son, plus their spouses in the audience, as well as 2 family friends and 2 grandchildren. No pressure.
And the composer.
And the composer, yeah, boy. So they're all going to be with us, and I'm kind of excited about that because rarely do we get to do a piece that is a piece about living people with opera. I do so many pieces, and Dean and I do pieces that are like 200 years old, But this is not one of those pieces. These people exist, and this is about their dad and their mom. And I think that's incredibly cool. It's really cool. And I don't think once Jim came home, the relationship with the wife deteriorated rapidly over about a year and a half, and then they ended up divorcing, and he moved to Key West. And the children tried to stay in touch, but he had suffered a lot through the war, and so that became a problem. And eventually they were, for most of their life, they were largely estranged from their father before he passed away. And so I didn't know how they would feel about coming to see this, but you know, it's about their dad. And so she wrote me again and said, we're all going to be there. We're so looking forward to this, and so that's going to be a very special night. And as you can hear from this aria, you may want to bring a Kleenex, because it is an opera, and but a beautiful, beautiful piece. I talked to a veteran. I've spoken with a number of veterans here in town with their experience, and one thing that kept coming up is back in that time, there was no email, there was no cell phone, there was no internet, and people wrote these things called letters, right? Which you don't see much anymore, but people did. Did you write letters, Bob?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I still have them. My mom kept them.
See?
So.
And a lot of the men still kept. I did speak to one veteran who told me that that he and his wife made a pact. He was there, I think, 2 years. He and his wife made a pact they would try to write every day. And they did. And so they exchanged letters. So when he came home with a big box full of letters, and she had all of his. And he said that when he got home, what they did is one night they had a good bottle of wine, they built a fire in the fireplace, and they burned them all. He said, we wanted to put it behind us, and we did. And he said, and I regret that to this day. He said, but when you're in your 20s, you do things like that. But that was a very important part of so many men's lives. That was the only communication. And before Thompson was imprisoned, he and his wife wrote back and forth a good bit. Once he was in prison, there was no way to find him, there was no way to get any messages to him, and so for years, she really didn't know if he was dead or alive. The Army said he is missing in action, POW probably. They eventually said he was a POW, definitely. And then there were no letters after that. But one thing that the opera does is it takes these letters, and a lot of the letters, the full text is in the book. By the way, the book is also called Glory Denied, and it's available at bookstores and Amazon. It's actually a very interesting read about this side of the Vietnam War. And so Tom, the composer, took a lot of these letters, and a lot of the text in the opera is based exactly on these letters. And so there's one letter that plays a big part in the show. And it's a letter that Alice wrote to Jim. This is way before the capture. And it's one of the most beautiful settings, I think, that Tom did. And it's a letter. The first line is, "My darling Jim." And I want to read the text to you, because what I find interesting is the text, if you read it, it's kind of mundane. It's just everyday things going on. But what you'll find under that text, and this is what opera and music theater does, the music then takes these words, and the music says a lot more about what is really being felt, right? So the lines here in the letter, and this is the actual letter she wrote, is "My darling Jim, today was gorgeous outside. Temperature in the 40s, not too cold. All the snow has melted except in the front where the sun never hits. The girls talk to your picture every day. And at night in their prayers they say, please keep our daddies safe. My darling Jim, today was gorgeous outside, not real cold. All the snow has melted except right in front where the sun never hits." Now, that is a letter that she wrote, which she's talking about the everyday things. And now you're going to hear the way Tom set this to music. And that text, once you add music to it, I think it changes a lot. So once again, with the lovely Amy Tate Williams at piano, I'd like to introduce soprano Emma Grimsley to sing My Darling Jim.
Today was gorgeous outside, temperature in the 40s, not real cold. All the snow melted, except right in front where the sun never hits. Talk to your picture every day, and at night in their graves, they say, please keep my daddy safe. Please keep our daddy safe. My darling Jim, today was gorgeous outside. Not real cold. All the snow melted, except right in front where the sun never hits.
So it is estimated within the next 5 years, this opera is going to be one of the most performed operas in the United States. We're starting it early. It's been done before in a handful of companies, but it felt like an important piece that we are doing. Once again, it's next weekend, 11, 12, and 13 at the Noah Liff Opera Center in Sylvan Heights. If you want tickets, please come to the Nashville Opera website, the TPAC website, or give us a call at the Opera or here at TPAC. I think it's a very intimate and very moving experience, and I hope you all join us for that. Gentlemen, anything to close with? We may take some questions in a second. No? Okay. Anybody have any questions about the show or about? You may have to help me, Kristen, make sure I see people. Anybody have any questions about the piece or the music? Or the story? Yes? There will be costuming for this. The two ladies, and by the way, Emma is playing younger Alice and Rebecca is playing older Alice in this, so they're really kind of the same character. They're going to be dressed, well, Emma is going to be dressed like a little out of Leave It to Beaver, or Father Knows Best. I think she has a nice little light blue top with a skirt. She is also, during the show, she is almost 7 months pregnant, because that's how she was. My idea with this is the characters look the way Thompson remembered them. And so that's the way she looks, and she looks a little early 1960s look. Think Laura Petrie and Dick Van Dyke Show, maybe. And then the older Alice is dressed a little more in a 1973 pantsuit with some bell bottoms, and it's very different. And there was 9 years, the fashion was huge. The younger Thompson is dressed in a POW outfit, which is a very interesting outfit that they had. They put different colored stripes. Mostly it's whitish gray with almost a red that fades into a pink, big stripes that covers, and he stays in that as a prisoner. The memory of Jim Thompson as his young self is always that as a prisoner. He never quite gets away from that. Thompson himself is in an authentic 1973 military dress outfit. So a lot of the period, as far as the dates, the period the show takes place and where the characters are delineated through the costumes for the characters. So yeah, it's fully staged with full costume. We have a fantastic lighting designer named Barry Steele who flies in tomorrow, and so we're going to start. It's a very intricate light show, because a lot of times in this, a character is singing and they're the only ones we see, and then somebody else comes up. So it's going to take a while to make it really intricate. Anyone else?
Yes, go ahead. What's the orchestration?
Dean.
It's actually very interesting. We're doing the version that everybody is doing now. When Tom told me when he first wrote it, it was fully orchestrated, so it was a big, giant orchestra. And then he rescored it for 16 instruments, and then it was taken down again when this production, this show was first done and recorded in Fort Worth. They commissioned a chamber orchestra for 9, and that's the version that everybody is doing now, and it's very effective. So it's flute, clarinet, horn, harp, piano, 1 violin, viola, and cello, and sounds like a giant orchestra. It's very similar to what Benjamin Britten did on his chamber operas, reducing things down to about 12 to 15 players, and very, very, very complicated. This is, I have to say, one of the more difficult scores I've ever had to deal with rhythmically. What Chapullo tends to do is to try to get the exact flow of the English language, but instead of using musical rhythmic notation, he uses meter changes. So you're constantly going, any musicians out there, you're going 3, 4, 6, 8, 7, 11, 2, 5. I mean, it's crazy all over the place. And you cannot stop thinking for 1 second. And he actually admitted to me in a very funny email, he said, yeah, every time this piece is done, the first orchestra rehearsal, everybody's cursing me out, they want to throw their scores against the wall. And then they get it, and then it's a lot of fun.
And two things I'll mention. One thing is we will be performing this as you heard the singers today. There's no amplification, there are no body mics. It is just the pure acoustic sound in this hall we'll have. The second thing is, even though the piece is in English, we are titling the piece, because there are a lot of very quick lines and things. We will make sure you get every word of this, because some certain words are very important to pick up. So we're going to be using super titles for the piece as well. If there's one more, we'll take that, and then I think you all may need to get back. Yes?
This is for Bob. And it's kind of, I'm not exactly sure how to ask it, but in the same way that it's difficult sometimes for veterans to readjust to life, do you find that POWs have a difficult readjustment when they're talking to other veterans? Is there a gap there, or does that brotherhood hold on, or do they have an additional layer of having to come to grips, even that makes it tough for them to talk, or to relate to other veterans?
I've never talked to a POW. I have a feeling that, like with anything, POWs will have something that the rest of us didn't experience, the length of time and the incarceration. but generally, I think veterans, we kind of almost recognize each other, and there's that shared experience. And there's an old joke, how many Vietnam veterans does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is, you'll never know, you weren't there. And there's a little bit of that to it. I think we all shared, a relatively unique experience that other people don't. You get a feel for it, I think, through things like this. It brings it alive for other people. So.
Well, the thing I'll say in closing with this is that many men like Bob here has served the country and came back and assimilates back into society, although it stays with you, I'm sure. A lot of men serve their country as a veteran, and they come back and they have a challenge, or they're unable to assimilate in society. And this piece is a little for them as well. And these men need our help. And we want to take care of our veterans. And this piece is a somewhat tragic story of a man who served his country. He was a hero in the war. He went through a horrible ordeal. He came back, and he may not have been able to get the help he needed. And I hope somehow we can fix that in the future. But it's an important piece, and I hope you'll all join us, for sure. Thank you so much. Thank you, panel. Thanks for letting us be here.